Alright, I've left a picture for you to import into the resources folder. The link is below in the description. Once imported, right-click in the hierarchy, hover over UI, and select Canvas. This creates both the Canvas and Event System game objects, selecting Event System, and click Replace with Input System UI Input Module in the inspector. Now selecting Canvas, we're going to make the following changes. We're going to set the Canvas component's render mode to screen space camera, the render camera to our scenes camera, our sorting layer to UI by first creating the UI layer before selecting it. We're going to set Canvas Scale's UI scale mode to scale with screen size, reference resolution to 1920 by 1080, and set match to 1. With our canvas now done, right-click it in the hierarchy and give it a child slider game object. Rename it to HP Slider, select it, and in the inspector, set whole numbers within the slider component to true. Then we'll make a few quick changes to the rest of it. So expanding your HP slider, followed by expanding fill area, use Shift and select background, fill area, and fill, before setting the React transform anchors to stretch. We're then going to set top, bottom, left, and right to 0. Now select background and set its image color to red 64, green 16, and blue 16. Then selecting fill, setting its image color to red 0, green 96, and blue 0. Lastly, expand handle slider area, select handle, and deactivate the image component. While we are done with the HP slider, we are missing vital text indicators, so give it a new Text Mesh Pro object. You'll get a pop-up, click Import TMP Essentials, followed by clicking Import TMP Examples and Extras. Once done, select our new Text Mesh Pro object and rename it to HP Slider Text. Set its anchor to stretch, followed by setting top, bottom, left, and right to 0. The font asset to Roboto, auto size to true, spacing options character 25, open extra settings, and set margins left to 30. With our text set up, place the HP slider in the bottom left corner with its anchor set to bottom left and size it as you wish. Once you are satisfied with the placement, right-click the canvas and create a scroll view game object. Select it, and in the inspector, set scroll react's horizontal boolean to false, and set both its horizontal and vertical scroll bars to none. Now expanding scroll view in the hierarchy, select both scroll bar objects and deactivate them. Next, expand viewport, select content, and add a grid layout group component before setting its constraint to fixed column count and 1. Add a content size fitter, setting both the fits to preferred size. Proceed to duplicate the scroll view object in the hierarchy, renaming the original scroll view to last 5 messages, and do the following. Set its anchor to bottom left, set the pos X to 1018, pos Y to 16, followed by its width to 1050 and height 130. Deactivate its image component, and set scroll react's vertical boolean to false. Open the viewport child, set the React transforms right to 0, before opening the content child object. Here, we're going to rename it to last 5 messages content, set its anchor to bottom stretch, set the grid layout group padding bottom to 5, and set cell size to 1040 by 25. And we're done with our last 5 messages. Now select the scroll view duplicate, rename it to message history, set the anchor to stretch, set top, bottom, left, and right to 75, and set the image's source image to our imported message history PNG. Making sure to set the alpha to 255. Before selecting the viewport child, setting its top to 30 and the rest 25. Now opening its content child, rename it to message history content, anchor to bottom stretch. We're going to go ahead and set the grid layout group's padding left 10 and bottom to 20. Its cell size to 1724 by 25. Before setting its spacing Y to 7. We need to create a message prefab. Luckily, it's simple to do. Create a TextMesh Pro object within Canvas. Rename it to message, and set the font asset to Roboto and auto size to true. Drag the message object into the resources folder, and delete it from the hierarchy. Now add 5 of the message prefabs into the last 5 messages content game object. I'll explain why in a moment. In our scripts folder, create a new script called UIManager and open it. Add the imports unityengine.ui and tmpro. Add a static instance variable referencing to UIManager and an awake method, followed by the following variables and headers. Most variables are created to help us manipulate our UI game object. The int and string variables are to help us add messages. And finally, the isMethod history open boolean and its getter. Let the player entity know when it can move around. Add 3 methods. The first, setHealthMax, takes in a max HP int using it to set the max value of the HP slider. The second, setHealth, takes in both a HP and a max HP ints, using them to set the HP slider value to the given HP, and text using string interpolation to HP:HP/max HP. And our third method is just to help us toggle the message history game object on and off, and also set the isMessage history open state. Now, add our following method, which is a public void add message method that takes in 2 strings, new message and color hex. We give it an if statement of last message equals new message. That helps us control duplicate messages, which adds an incrementing value to the end of the last message before returning. We also place in an else if statement, its condition same message count greater than 0, which sets same message count to 0 if true. If both statements aren't used, we change last message to new message, followed by instantiating a message prefab as TextMesh Pro UGUI. We then set the text to the new message and set its color to getColorFromHex method's return value, passing in the color hex. The getColorFromHex method is just a helper method that utilizes Unity Engine's color utility. We give it a hex code and it returns a color. If we get no color, it just returns white. Now continuing with our addMessage method, we set the message prefab's parent to the message history content game object before using a for loop, which loops over the last 5 messages content child count, incrementing each loop. It has an if statement that returns if the child count is less than I. Else, it moves forward getting the child TextMesh Pro UGUI components of the last 5 messages content and message history content, which in turn sets the last 5 message content child's text and color to that of the message history content's child. Now, scroll up and add a start method that welcomes the player before opening the action class. Add a string variable called colorHex below attack the script in MeleeAction, giving it an empty string. Then create an if statement that gives colorHex an actual hex code, based on if our actorGetComponentPlayer returns true. Before exchanging our debug.log calls for our UIManager's addMessage method, making sure to pass in colorHex at the end. Now open the fighter class, and within the HP setter, add an if statement, its condition being getComponentPlayer, which calls UIManager's setHealth method if true, passing in HP and max HP. Next, create a start method that, like the HP setter, contains an if statement that checks for our getComponentPlayer, calling setHealthMax and setHealth if true, before exchanging our debug.logs and die for calls to the UIManager's addMessage method. Open the Unity editor back up, navigate to the entity folder, double-click controls, and add a new action called View, setting the binding to V, making sure to also set the arrow keys boolean to true. Save the asset before opening the player class. Here, we're going to create a new if statement in the fixedUpdate method that checks that the UIManager's isMessage history open boolean is false, which of course stops the player from moving if it isn't. Finally, we add a public void onView method, which takes in our callback context, and has an if statement that checks context.performed that we use to open and close the message history game object. Save and go back to the editor. Navigate back to scripts, and drag the UIManager onto the canvas game object. We're going to set up its components. Deactivate the message history game object, opening the resource folder, and drag the canvas into it. Just going to quickly remove the new text messages and press play. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't, and as always, I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.